So in tip 9, I want to talk about play calling for deep ball throwing efficiency. And I want to remind you that as I do this football coaching strategy and tips, that everything I learned came from game video. In other words, I went to coaches' clinics, I read books, I talked to other coaches, but whenever I implemented a system, offense, defense, or special teams, I made sure to really watch and analyze how those worked in the games, because that's where the information and feedback you're going to get that's going to best be able to help you continue to improve your schemes and your players. So with regard to that, in 2005, I had an Elite 11 quarterback who was the number 5 quarterback in the country. He was 6'5", 230, and he threw the ball really well. Prior to that time, I was running wing T, running some I, running some power I, but it was pretty much run, play action, rollout based offense. But I knew that him coming into our system, that we need to take advantage of his skill set. So I needed to develop a passing attack that would enable him to maximize his ability, but enable also us to take advantage of the fact that we had a kid who could throw, but we had some receivers that could play and run routes and catch really well. So what we did was we implemented more of the spread system. We still had a tight end, but we had more sets that allowed us to put 4 or 5 receivers out in a pass route. And we started with some pass plays that we thought would take advantage of what he could do. Well, his first year, he started as a sophomore in 05. He threw 17 interceptions. And I knew that couldn't be all his ability because he could throw really well, but it also was a new system. So I went back and I watched every single interception, and I watched it in the context of what play was called. Was it the same play that kept getting intercepted? Where on the field was the interception thrown? Was it in the minus territory, the plus territory? Who were we throwing to? What routes? Was there a common route that we were throwing interceptions on? And what I found was that 12 of his 17 interceptions happened between the -1 and the plus 30-yard line. So the majority of those were when I called a play, or we executed a play between the -1 and the plus 30, and that resulted in 12 of his 17 interceptions. So the question is, well, why would that happen? Why did that happen? And as a head coach of 23 years, I also planned the defense and special team schemes. So I knew what I was coaching in terms of defensively, and I knew what most people would be coaching in terms of the defensive secondary coverage in these areas, but particularly in the negative yard area when you're coming out from your own end zone. Because everything that we coach is DBs don't give up a deep ball. So we're coaching our safeties to play deeper. We're doing more zone dropping with regard to that, because if you take a chance and play man-to-man in this minus territory and they hit a pass, who knows how many yards they could gain, or they could possibly go all the way to the end zone for a touchdown. So understanding that the defenders in the secondary are defending against the deep ball, we decided to start de-emphasizing deep balls in this -1 to plus 30-yard line and see how that would reduce the number of our interception, but also how it would help our deep ball throwing efficiency. So the philosophical change that I made in terms of the passing offense and how we were going to execute those plays was, the conventional wisdom is when you're in this minus territory, take a couple deep shots to see if you can take the top off the coverage or keep the coverage guys from creeping in and blitzing you and trying to get a turnover in that minus area. And what I did is flip that, and I said, I'm going to read short throws to deep throws. And I'm going to design plays that have short routes, intermediate routes, and deep ball routes. And I'm going to throw as many short routes as I can in this minus yard area to this plus 30-yard area, because I know that the defense is being coached not to give up a deep ball touchdown. So here's 2 examples of plays that I've run that emphasize and have the short, intermediate, and deep ball throws. Okay? So what we're going to do is, the X has the intermediate route. He's running a comeback, and that's in that 10 to 12 yard range. The A out of the backfield, and this is a 3x1 set, is running a seam route, which ends up being one of the deep balls that we have. The B is running the shallow underneath. The Z is running a post, and the W is running a hitch. So what we would do is, when we're in this -30 to -1 to +30, we're going to throw these short routes or the intermediate route as much as we can on the way down the field. But we still have a home run throw or a deep ball throw with this post, and if A was up in the slot, he would be running basically a fade route or a go route. So we have deep balls built in. But the thing that we want to do is, we want to gather information on the deep ball throws as to how the secondary is going to play those deep balls as we go from the -1 to the +30. So what I would do is, I would have the quarterback throw these short routes, mix in some good runs with regard to that between the -1 and the +30, and then we would watch to see how the secondary would play these deep ball throws. The other thing I would have us do is, I would have the receivers, if you were not thrown the ball, it was your job to find the person who was supposed to cover you and figure out how he was playing you. For example, if we called this 3 route and we threw the shallow, then I would expect the Z, when he came back at the end of that series, to tell me, hey, on my post, the strong safety leveled off and I could get behind him. And I would say, okay, great. And I would put that in the mix for my deep ball throw when I cross the +30. If you look over here to the 4 route, we have X running a post. We have A now running the shallow. We have B running this arrow out. Z is running an in. So he's in the intermediate area. The A and the B are in the shallow area. And then this W takeoff. Now this is the same thing as a go route, but I differentiate my nomenclature between whether I want the receiver to run a deep go by either releasing inside or outside of that receiver. So a takeoff route tells him to release inside, the guy over top of him, and then stack him and get back outside. If it was a fade, it would tell him that we want him to release outside the receiver. And that's simply a way to manipulate the corner's eyes as to where he's going to look and what technique that we think he's going to play. So I have that ability to do both those releases. But in this particular case, we have a post that would gather information and a go route or takeoff that would gather deep ball information, while we have 3 other routes, an intermediate and 2 short routes, to be able to throw on our way down the field. Okay? The question would be is, what if you run this play and this strong safety bites on the in route, and this takeoff is wide over because the corner lets him go thinking the strong safety is going to get it, and he comes back on this arrow out? Would you throw that deep ball? Absolutely. The quarterback would look through this window, and he would see that safety squatted on this in route, and he's feel free to throw that any time between the -1 and the +30. The thing that we found, though, is it doesn't present itself very often in these yard lines. So usually, maybe against a bad team, but against the good teams, those safeties are taught to play deep, and they do play deep. So we're simply going to take all this underneath stuff as much as we can as we go down those yard lines for that. So our deep ball throwing efficiency improved when we didn't try to force deep balls between the -1 and the +30. And you say, well, why is +30 a magic yard line to all of a sudden want to throw deep balls? Well, what happens is the safeties and the secondary players have to protect the goal line, because 6 inches beyond the goal line is a touchdown. So when you get into this +30 area, and particularly into the +20 area, those safeties level off. So if they're lined up at 12 yards, they only have 8 yards to backpedal before they're in the end zone. And if you watch your videos, quite often those guys aren't trained well enough to not backpedal in the end zone. So they end up in the end zone, and you can throw these posts, you can throw corners, you can throw digs right in front of them and score touchdowns. So that's why when they get to the plus 30, they start to level off. And now this information that we've gathered on these routes allow the quarterback and receiver to be able to know that they can throw that ball and get a touchdown. So I've never been interested in throwing a post on the minus 10-yard line and gaining 20 yards and having a first down. I would rather throw those deep balls and throw those for home runs, meaning touchdowns. So I take this short route underneath, good running plays, gather information about these deep routes on the way down the field, or if I need to, in between series, and I come up with a strategy for what I'm going to throw, post, corner, comeback, fade, into the end zone when I get into this plus territory. So that's how you can improve your deep ball throwing efficiency if you take those short stuff, because the defense is playing deep in this minus 1 to plus 30-yard line, but your routes have to have deep routes enable you to gather that information. And then when you get in that plus territory, you can throw those for touchdowns.